Hey everyone, Pastor Patrick Walker. I am in Genesis chapter 21 now. Seems like we're doing one devotional per chapter. Not a lot in this chapter, but I will mention a couple things. So, the Lord was gracious to Sarah. This is verse 1. She's 90 years old. She becomes pregnant, and she bears a son to Abraham in his old age. So Abraham is 10 years older. He's going to be 100 at this time, in accordance with what God had promised. And it says, verse 4, when Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him, circumcised and dedicated on the 8th day. We see the same thing in the life of Jesus. As I had mentioned on a previous devotional, that's when vitamin K hit its peak to allow for blood clotting. So the day of dedication comes, and Sarah said, God has brought me laughter. This is verse 6. And everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. Now, here's what's really interesting. So if we go back to Genesis chapter 17, we see that when God first talks to Abraham, he says, you will bear a son, and he says, you are to name him Isaac. Okay? Isaac means laughter. God specifically commanded Abraham, you are to name him Isaac, laughter. Then we get to the next chapter, which is Genesis chapter 18. And that is when God, or I should say Jesus, with the two angels, appears to Abraham at his tent, has a discussion. Sarah is inside the tent. She's on the inside, but she's listening in. And Jesus, who is called the angel of the Lord, who is in disguised fashion, basically says to Abraham, your wife is going to have a son by this time next year. And she laughs to herself inside the tent. And Jesus says, well, why did Sarah just laugh? I mean, she comes out, why did you laugh? She says, I didn't laugh. She was afraid. So she lied. He's like, you did laugh. And so here's what's so interesting. In the previous chapter 17, God already named the boy, Isaac, laughter. And then later on in chapter 18, we have this account with Sarah where she kind of chuckles to herself, maybe in a lack of faith, saying, oh, no, this is going to be too good to be true. There's no way. I'm past the age of childbearing. And she laughs. So God already knew what I'm getting at. You know what I mean? God named the child because of his foreknowledge of what would take place in the future when there was a confrontation with Abraham and his wife Sarah, and Sarah would laugh. So we see here, she's just musing on this in verse 6. Everybody is going to be totally amazed that I have had a child at my age. And that we named him Laughter. Now, verse 8, as the child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, usually that was up to 5 years old. So there's no age that's mentioned here in Scripture, but traditionally, historically, in the rabbinic writings, that could be up to the age of 5. I don't know how that works, but the rabbi said you could nurse a child up to the age of 5. All right. So he's 2, 1. No, he's got to be bigger than 1. I mean, my son is 1.5. He's still occasionally. So 2 to 5. And there's a great feast. Now, the Jewish tradition, I say Jewish tradition because it's like Jewish commentary that has been passed down, essentially says that great feast included Abraham's brother from Haran in the north. They came down, and Abraham's father and their family came down for a visit, an extended visit and stay with Abraham, and was there for the feast. And also but Jewish commentary says that Shem and his great-grandson Eber, I don't know about his son Arphaxad, or I can't remember Arphaxad's son, Selah. All right, so Shem, Arphaxad, Selah, Eber. So it says that Shem and Eber came. Eber lived to be 464 maybe. And I know that Shem lived 500 years after the flood. So Shem lived he outlived Abraham. So it's very likely that Shem and Eber could have, and that's what Jewish commentary says, was also present at this feast. But something happens. And you remember that Ishmael is 13, 14 years older than Isaac. So how old is he here? He's a teenager. And it says that Hagar, the Egyptian, had born to Abraham, was mocking her son. So Sarah saw that Ishmael was mocking her son, Isaac. And she got angry. And she basically goes to her husband and says, get rid of this slave woman and her son because they're not going to have a share in the inheritance. Abraham is distressed, but God reassures him, says, send them away. And they're sent away, and God takes care of him, and he becomes an archer. His wife gets his mother gets a wife for him from Egypt. This is verse 21. Verse 20 says, God was with the boy as he grew up, and he lived in the desert and became an archer. And God provides for them. So that child is sent away. And the rest of the chapter essentially is an interaction between Abimelech, who is king of the Philistines. I think Abimelech is a title like Pharaoh, referring to king, because we see a lot of Abimelechs in Scripture. I don't think it was a name, because we're gonna see another Abimelech later on, hundreds of years later. So I think it's more like a Pharaoh for the Philistines. And there's this interaction between Abraham and Abimelech over a well that is dug, and they make a peace treaty not to harm one another, and that is sealed because Abraham is living in Beersheba at this time. And if you type Beersheba in on Google Maps, you'll see in Israel, it's southwest of Jerusalem. It's not exactly along the coast, like Gaza, but it's further inland, but it's kind of desert area today. So I don't know what the grazing land was like back then. We're talking 3,000 years ago, more than 3,000, 4,000 years ago. So it could have been much different back then, but that's where Abraham is living. He's living in Beersheba, and this sets us up for a journey that he will take in chapter 22, which we'll do for the next devotional. All right? Until tomorrow, God bless.